We need to talk about how Tim Walz just told Congress that the Trump administration sent 2,000 masked, untrained ICE agents into Minnesota under the guise of fighting fraud, then got 2 American citizens killed, and they haven't solved a single fraud case. So you had Republicans firing back that Walz actually knew about billions in fraud for years and just did nothing. In this hearing that was supposed to sort it out, it kind of went absolutely nowhere. Right? And for some quick context here, Minnesota does have a real fraud problem. It's serious enough that it contributed to Walz dropping his re-election bid. But the administration's response was to flood the state with ICE agents, target the Somali community, and cut $259 million in Medicaid funding, which knocked 400,000 kids off of healthcare. And you've got the situation where 2 U.S. citizens, Renee and Alex Pretti, were killed by ICE agents during those operations, and federal law enforcement still refuses to cooperate with state investigators on their deaths. And so yesterday you had Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison sitting in front of the House Oversight Committee, and it was kind of ugly from the jump.
As governor, I expect you to know this information. Thank God you're not Vice President of the United States.
Now, before the hearing started, you had the Oversight Committee releasing a report with serious allegations against Walz and Ellison.
You were aware of this level of fraud and investigations, and yet it seems like nothing was done. Why didn't you do something sooner?
With the report claiming that Walz and Ellison were aware of fraud problems as early as 2019, and they just allowed state agencies to continue funding groups suspected of fraud to avoid accusations of racism. It also made claims related to Feeding Our Future, which is a nonprofit that became central to the scandal, and you, the committee, saying that all of this resulted in potentially billions of dollars of Medicaid-related funds being lost or at risk. And so you saw Republicans at the hearing very focused on taxpayer money.
We believe that's your fault and the Attorney General's fault, because you do nothing about fraud, even though everyone in America sees
our Medicare error rate is lower.
The American taxpayers have had enough.
Ellison also got hit hard too.
Are you leading the criminal investigative effort into this massive fraud across the board in the healthcare spectrum in the state of Minnesota or not?
We are following the law. And
you are not leading. You're not leading. I'm going to say, Mr. Chairman, that the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota should resign.
But also you had Walz kind of coming out swinging with his opening statement.
The people of Minnesota have been singled out and targeted for political retribution at an unparalleled scale. Under the guise of combating fraud, the federal government has flooded Minnesota with masked, untrained, and unaccountable agents who are wreaking havoc in our communities.
He also argued that he's been reaching out for federal support to solve the fraud problem, but the resources aren't there, and the investigators and teams that he'd need, they've left as ICE operations escalated.
Right now, those lead investigators and basically that whole team has left that office. We're going to prosecute, as we have, every single person that's involved in fraud, but we can't do it alone.
And you also saw him being direct about what Operation Metro Surge was actually accomplishing.
Operation Metro Surge did nothing to address fraud in our state. It harmed our economy, it scarred our people, and it dealt a devastating blow to fraud enforcement in Minnesota.
And you Democrats backing Walz's argument that ICE has done nothing to actually address fraud. They also pressed on how ICE operations are affecting the kids.
Are you seeing families who can't go to work, who can't go grocery shopping, and who can't take their kids to school or the library or the park because they're terrified to leave their home? Are you seeing that?
Yes, that's what we are seeing in Minnesota.
And you had Walz highlighting the impossible position that the state's in when it comes to cutting off programs where fraud exists, but children depend on the services.
We're not going to stop payments of feed children until we have the proof that things happen.
And that's one of the biggest things here. 400,000 kids in Minnesota, they're already off healthcare because of the administration's Medicaid cuts. And again, the fraud is real, but so is the collateral damage of the response. And with all this, one of the major points of contention is the Feeding Our Future nonprofit, which grew rapidly during the pandemic. And while it came under fraud suspicion in 2021, had its funding cut, it then saw that funding restarted a short time later. And its leaders were actually eventually convicted, but not before taxpayer money was already gone. And so one of the big questions yesterday was, how did this funding get restarted given all the red flags? But the hearing never actually landed on a clear answer. You had Walz pointing to the courts, the courts pointing back to Walz, and everyone watching was kind of just left confused.
So I want to know, why didn't you tell the truth?
Congressman, the attorneys at the Department of Education interpreted that differently. Both of those judges are no longer on the bench.
So the court's lying?
I can't tell you, Congressman, but the interpretation was
lying.
And so with all of that, we'll see if anything comes for it. But my kind of like what I was left with after going through all this hearing kind of embodied one of the reasons that a lot of people just are tired of politics. I felt like politicians clip hunting for social media likes. I felt like nothing was really learned. And it generally feels like, other than people getting hurt in the meantime, nothing's going to change, right? We're not anywhere closer to people being held responsible or even being monitored more closely, especially given like ICE. And then as it relates to fraud in Minnesota, like as far as relief for taxpayers, I don't see that coming, although the fraud issue is also not completely solved and no one seems to have a plan or to support or solve it.